She didn't cry. That was the strangest thing in that room. Candles flickering, the smell of roasted meat hanging thick in the air, Christmas music playing softly from the corner speaker, her cheek burning red from an open-handed slap, and her eyes completely dry. No tears, just silence heavy enough to crack the table in half. Every person seated at that dinner froze. No one moved. No one breathed. And then the front door swung open, and the man standing in the snowfall wasn't a guest, wasn't a relative, wasn't anyone who had ever been invited to a Christmas celebration in his life. He looked at the handprint on her face. He looked at the woman who had put it there, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees before he said a single word. If you want to know what happened next, stay until the end. Hit the like button and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled.
Você é
The snow had been falling since noon. By the time the Whitmore household had filled with relatives and guests, a thin white crust covered the front lawn, the iron gate at the end of the driveway, and the bare branches of the oak tree that Adeline Whitmore had climbed as a child when she needed to disappear. She used to sit up there for hours, hidden between branches, watching cars move along the street below, and imagining a life that belonged to someone else entirely. She was 31 years old now, and she still felt the same pull toward that tree whenever she stepped out of her own front door. Tonight she stayed inside. She didn't have a choice. The Whitmore family Christmas dinner was not a celebration. It was a performance. It had been a performance every year since Richard Whitmore married Vivian Ashcroft 6 years ago. And every year the performance demanded the same things from Adeline: pressed clothing, a composed expression, minimal speaking, and absolute invisibility. She was permitted to exist in the house as long as she did not inconvenience anyone. The moment she became inconvenient, the rules changed. She stood at the kitchen counter and pressed her palms flat against the cold granite, steadying herself. Through the kitchen doorway, she could hear voices carrying from the dining room: her father's forced laughter, Vivian's practiced warmth, the polite murmuring of guests who had driven 40 minutes through a snowstorm, because declining the Whitmore holiday invitation was professionally unwise. Richard Whitmore still held enough connections in this city to make a snub painful. It didn't matter that those connections were fraying. The image remained. The performance continued. Adeline lifted the serving dish and carried it toward the dining room. The table was long enough to seat 14, and tonight it seated 12. 2 empty chairs at the far end, the ones Vivian always left conspicuously unfilled to suggest the family had simply run out of people worthy enough to invite. Crystal glassware, white linen pressed without a single crease, a centerpiece of holly and winter berries that Vivian had arranged herself and had mentioned arranging no fewer than 4 times since the guests arrived. At the head of the table sat Richard Whitmore, 62 years old, silver-haired, wearing the easy smile of a man who had spent 4 decades learning to look confident in rooms that were slowly collapsing around him. He looked well. He always looked well. That was his particular talent. Vivian sat to his left, in a burgundy dress that had cost more than Adeline's monthly living allowance. She was 50, and she looked 40, and she knew it, and she wanted everyone else to know she knew it. Her hair was dark and smooth, and her jewelry was understated in the way that only very expensive jewelry can be understated. She was laughing at something one of the guests had said. A real estate attorney named Gordon Hale, who had the particular quality of laughing slightly too hard at everything, and her hand rested lightly on the stem of her wine glass with the practiced elegance of a woman who had rehearsed this version of herself so many times, the performance had become instinct. She did not look at Adeline when Adeline set the serving dish on the table. She never did, not directly. Vivian operated through periphery, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a small adjustment in posture, the particular way she angled her chin when Adeline entered a room, as though acknowledging Adeline fully would be a concession she wasn't prepared to make. It was a sophisticated form of erasure. Adeline had spent 6 years learning to read it. She took her seat at the far end of the table, 2 chairs removed from the nearest guest, and unfolded her napkin. Dinner proceeded. Courses moved in and out of the kitchen with the rhythm of a stage production. Soup, then bread, then the main spread of roasted meat and glazed vegetables that Adeline had spent 7 hours preparing while Vivian hosted the pre-dinner cocktail hour in the living room. No one thanked Adeline for the food. This was not unusual. The food simply appeared, which was the point. Adeline simply existed, which was also the point. She kept her eyes down and ate carefully and listened to conversations she was not invited to join. It was Gordon Hale who broke everything open, though he had no idea he was doing it. He was somewhere deep in a story about a commercial property deal, something about financing that had fallen through at the last possible moment, liens discovered on a building that should have been clean. And he said, with the casual authority of a man who dealt in these things professionally, "The frightening part is how many families are walking around right now, sitting on mortgaged homes they can't actually afford. Took out equity lines to cover lifestyle expenses. You'd be stunned how common it is, even in neighborhoods like this one." He gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the street outside, toward the postcard-perfect houses with their holiday lights and snow-dusted driveways. "Looks like security often isn't." Richard Whitmore's smile remained completely unchanged. That was what years of practice gave you, the ability to keep smiling while your body temperature dropped. Vivian reached for her wine glass. Adeline, without thinking, said quietly, "This neighborhood specifically has seen 3 foreclosures in the past 18 months. She said it the way you say something when you are simply contributing factual information to a factual conversation, the way you might mention the weather or the time. She was not trying to say anything else. She was not trying to expose anyone or draw attention or start anything. She was trying to participate in a dinner conversation for perhaps the first time in 6 years, because Gordon Hale had said something true, and she had known something true in response to it. And for one unguarded moment, she had forgotten where she was and who was sitting 20 feet away watching her. Gordon Hale raised his eyebrows in polite interest. "That right? You follow the property market?" "Somewhat," Adeline said. "My father refinanced this house twice in the last 4 years." She said this plainly, the way you state facts, and it was only in the silence that followed that she understood what she had done. The silence lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then Vivian set her wine glass down. The sound it made against the table was not loud. It was precise, controlled, the sound of a decision being made. "Adeline?" Her voice was light, almost musical, the voice she used when she was most dangerous. "Why would you share something like that with our guests?" Adeline felt the familiar cold move through her chest. You were just... Vivian smiled. The smile didn't touch anything above her cheekbones. "You were just humiliating this family in front of people who have come into our home on Christmas Eve. You were just announcing our private financial situation to a room full of colleagues and friends. You were just..." She let the word hang, "being you." Richard said nothing. He turned his wine glass slowly in his fingers and said nothing. "I didn't mean..." Adeline started. "You never mean..." Vivian stood. She did it slowly, with complete control, smoothing the front of her dress as she rose. "That's always the excuse, isn't it? You never mean anything, you just open your mouth and damage falls out, and then you look surprised when someone calls you on it." She walked around the table. Her heels were quiet on the floor. Several of the guests looked at their plates. Gordon Hale had developed a sudden intense interest in his water glass. 6 years. 6 years I have managed this household, managed your father's reputation, managed every crisis and every complication, and you..." She stopped beside Adeline's chair. "You sit at my table on Christmas Eve and broadcast our business to the room." "Vivian," Richard said. His voice was low. Warning or plea, it was impossible to tell. It didn't matter. He wouldn't do anything. He never did anything. "Don't," Vivian said without turning around. Her eyes stayed on Adeline. "Don't you dare defend her right now." Adeline stood. It was a reflex. When Vivian got close, her body wanted vertical space, wanted to be upright rather than sitting and looking up. She pushed her chair back and stood, and she said, keeping her voice as steady as she could manage, "I'll go back to the kitchen." She turned. Vivian's hand caught her across the left cheek. The sound was flat and sharp and completely out of proportion to the careful, controlled performance of the evening. Several people gasped. One woman made a small, wounded sound. The blow was hard enough to turn Adeline's head, hard enough to send a white flash across her vision, and the pain arrived 1 full second after impact, the way serious pain always does, as though her body needed a moment to process what had just occurred. Adeline stood still. She did not put her hand to her cheek. She did not make a sound. Her ears were ringing, and the left side of her face was beginning to pulse with heat, and she stood in the middle of the Whitmore family Christmas dinner with 12 people watching her, and she made a decision. The same decision she had made every time before. The decision that was ground so deep into her, now it had stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like anatomy. She did not react. She did not cry. She held her breath and held herself still and waited for the moment to pass. "Look at what you make me do," Vivian said. Her voice had gone quiet, almost sad. The performance had pivoted instantly from rage to injury, the way it always did. "Look at what you force." Adeline looked at her father. Richard Whitmore was staring at the tablecloth. The front door opened. She heard it before she processed it. A shift in the air, a gust of cold that reached all the way to the dining room, and then footsteps crossing the entrance hall with a quality that was different from any other footsteps she had heard inside this house. Not hesitant, not deferential, not the tentative approach of a late guest uncertain of their welcome. These were the footsteps of a man who assessed every room he entered and had already decided what he thought of this one. Damien DeLuca stopped in the doorway of the dining room. He was tall, not imposingly, theatrically tall, but tall in the way that announces itself before height becomes the point. Dark coat, no tie. The kind of clothing that was expensive without advertising that it was expensive. His face was angular and still, the face of a man who had learned early that stillness communicates more than movement. He was 40 years old, and he looked it, not worn out by it, but marked by it, the way good timber gets marked by weather. Dark hair, dark eyes, a jaw that had a scar along the lower left edge that he had never bothered to conceal. He stood in the doorway and took in the room. His gaze moved across the guests, registering them, filing them away with the efficient indifference of a man for whom other people are primarily logistical considerations. It moved across the table, the candles, the untouched food, Richard Whitmore's carefully arranged expression of calm. It moved across Vivian, who had turned and was now facing him with the composure of a woman recalibrating very rapidly. Then it landed on Adeline, and it stayed there. She felt it the way you feel a change in barometric pressure, not painful, not precisely, but a physical awareness of something shifting. His eyes moved to the left side of her face, where the heat was still spreading beneath the skin, and they stayed there for a moment that was slightly too long to be casual. Something moved behind his expression. Not pity, not outrage. Something quieter and colder and considerably more deliberate than either of those things. "Richard Whitmore," he said. His voice was even, the kind of even that takes years of specific life experience to produce. I called ahead. Richard stood. He was good at standing, good at the posture of authority, even now, even here. "Mr. DeLuca, this is..." He gestured at the room, the guests, the Christmas tableau, as though the existence of the dinner party were itself an argument. "This isn't a good time." "I can see that," Damien said. He hadn't moved from the doorway. He didn't need to. He said it without looking at Richard because he was still looking at Adeline. Then he looked at Richard. "We can speak privately, or we can speak here. Either way, we're speaking tonight." Gordon Hale pushed his chair back approximately 2 inches, the instinctive micro-retreat of a man who has just understood that he is in a room where something is happening that he wants no part of. Vivian smoothed the front of her dress. She had recovered. She was good at recovering. "I'm afraid we're in the middle of a family dinner, Mr. DeLuca, and I don't believe you received an invitation. Whatever business you have with my husband, your husband owes my organization $4,200,000. Damien's voice remained completely even. "The repayment window closed 11 days ago. I'm not interested in your dinner party." He paused. "I'm interested in the arrangement we agreed to." The room went the specific quiet of people who are trying to become furniture. Richard's composure fractured at the edges, not dramatically, not in any way a stranger would necessarily notice, but Adeline had spent 31 years watching her father's face, and she saw the fracture, the slight slackening below the eyes, the way his jaw shifted, the effort required to keep breathing normally. "We should speak privately," Richard said. "Then let's go." "After dinner? Now!" The word fell like a door closing. "We go now, or we have the conversation in front of your Christmas guests. I'm genuinely indifferent to which." Vivian stepped forward. She had gathered herself completely. Chin up, voice controlled, projecting the absolute conviction of a woman who had never in her life been backed into a corner. I don't know what you think gives you the right to walk into this home and disrupt a private family event, but I can assure you that my husband will contact your people Monday morning, and whatever financial misunderstanding exists can be addressed through proper financial misunderstanding, Damien repeated. He looked at her for the first time, looked at her with a quality of attention that was not hostile and not warm and was something significantly more unsettling than either. 4 years of gambling debt, 17 separate loan disbursements, 2 forged collateral documents, a lien on this property taken out 18 months ago without the knowledge of the primary title holder. He glanced at Adeline when he said that last part, then back to Vivian. Which part is the misunderstanding? Vivian said nothing. That's what I thought, Damien said. Gordon Hale stood up. I think perhaps we should give the family some privacy. He was already gesturing to his wife, who was already reaching for her purse. The exodus was discreet but immediate. 3 other couples followed within 30 seconds. The awkward mechanical efficiency of people who have decided that whatever is happening in this room, they would strongly prefer to hear about it secondhand rather than witness it directly. Coats retrieved from the front closet. Brief murmured half apologies directed at no one in particular. The front door opened and closed, until the dining room contained only the Whitmore family and Damien DeLuca and the remains of a Christmas dinner that no one was going to finish. The candles burned. The Christmas music continued from the corner speaker for another few seconds before Vivian crossed the room and turned it off. The silence afterward was very complete. Damien moved to the dining room table and pulled out a chair and sat down as though the table and the chair and the room belonged to him. He rested one forearm on the linen tablecloth and looked at Richard. "Sit down," he said. Richard sat. He had no choice, and they both understood that. Vivian remained standing, which was her own particular choice. The refusal to sit when instructed was the last available gesture of defiance, and she was taking it. Her eyes moved between Damien and her husband with quick, calculating precision. Adeline had not moved. She was still standing in the same position where the slap had left her, slightly off-center from her chair, one hand resting on the table's edge. The left side of her face had moved from hot to aching. She could feel the shape of Vivian's palm in the skin of her cheek. Damien glanced at her. "You can sit," he said. His voice was different when he said it to her. Not softer exactly, but the evenness had shifted into something adjacent to human. "Or stand. Either is fine." She sat. She didn't know why. She didn't know why his permission mattered more than anything else in the room, only that in the particular disorder of this moment, someone offering her a choice felt like water when she hadn't realized she was thirsty. Damien turned back to Richard. "Here's where we are," he said. "The loan is $4.2 million. Interest has been compounding since the original window closed 3 years ago. Total outstanding is closer to 6. The collateral documentation your lawyer filed includes forgeries that my people have already flagged to 2 separate investigators, which means you are currently managing a civil exposure that is about to become a criminal one." He said all of this with the tone of a man reading a grocery list. Not cruel, not theatrical, simply factual, which was somehow worse than either. The house is worth approximately $800,000 in the current market. You have maybe 60 days before this becomes public in ways you cannot manage. Richard's jaw was tight. "I can get you money." "You've been saying that for 3 years." "I have contacts. I can liquidate—" "Richard." Damien said the name the way you'd say stop. "We are past the part of the conversation where your promises are currency. I know exactly what you have and what you don't have, and what you don't have is $6 million. He paused. "What I'm interested in tonight is not destroying what's left of your family's standing. Contrary to what you appear to believe, I don't find that particularly satisfying." Vivian made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief, something between them. Damien looked at her. "You have something to say?" "I have quite a few things to say," she said. "Starting with the fact that you walked uninvited into a private residence and made accusations in front of—" "I didn't make accusations," he said. "I stated balances. There's a difference. You humiliated this family. Your family humiliated itself. He said it simply, no emphasis. I watched what happened in this room before I walked in. I heard it from the hallway. His eyes moved to the left side of Adeline's face again, briefly, and then back to Vivian. Whatever you've built this holiday to look like, that's not what it is. Vivian's composure held, barely. Don't presume to tell me what this family is. I'm not, he said. I'm telling you what it isn't. He turned to Richard again, and something shifted in his posture. A slight forward lean, the lean of a man preparing to make a point he has decided will be the last one. I came here tonight to discuss a restructured arrangement. I wasn't planning anything complicated. He paused. I've reconsidered. Richard looked at him. Reconsidered how? Damien was quiet for a moment. He wasn't the kind of man who used silence as theater. He used it because he was actually thinking, which made it more unnerving. The debt gets cleared. All of it. Not restructured, not extended. Cleared. He looked at Richard. In exchange for one thing. The room waited. Your daughter works for me. Directly. 90 days as my executive assistant. Legitimate business work. Nothing else. She has my word on that. After 90 days, the debt is gone, the documentation is buried, and whatever is left of your family's reputation survives. He sat back slightly. That's the offer. Richard stared at him. Vivian said, absolutely not. I'm not asking you, Damien said. He looked at Adeline. She had not moved, had not breathed normally since he'd made the offer, could feel the blood moving through the bruised skin on her cheek, and the particular stillness that settles over a person when they understand that something real is happening. Not the performed dramas of this household, not another round of Vivian's controlled cruelty dressed as family necessity. Something actually real, with actual weight, with actual consequences that could not be managed or smoothed over. I'm asking her, Damien said. His eyes held hers with a steadiness that was unusual. Not intimidating, not searching, just present, the way a person looks at you when they actually intend to hear the answer. It's her decision. I'm not taking her anywhere she doesn't agree to go. Adeline looked at her father. Richard was looking at the table. She looked at Vivian. Vivian was looking at her with an expression that Adeline had seen many times over 6 years, an expression that said, you belong here, which meant you belong to me, which meant you will not embarrass me by doing something I cannot control. She looked at her own hands on the table. Her knuckles. The thin scar on her right index finger from a kitchen accident 2 years ago. The chipped nail on her thumb that she hadn't gotten around to fixing because fixing small things for herself had stopped feeling worth the effort somewhere around year 3. Vivian would like me to say no, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Damien said nothing. He waited. My father would like me to say no, she continued. Because if I say no, things go back to the way they were, which is uncomfortable and dishonest and humiliating for all of them in ways they've learned to live with. She looked up. If I say yes, none of them can control what happens next. That's correct, Damien said. Vivian said, Adeline, and the warning in her voice was the specific warning of a woman who has just realized the ground is shifting. Do not do something stupid and irreversible because a strange man offered you a way out of a family disagreement. You don't know him. You don't know what he... I know what you are, Adeline said. The words came out quiet and without particular force, and that was what silenced Vivian. Not the volume, not the anger, just the clarity. 6 years of clarity, assembled and finally stated, without apology, without performance. Vivian's mouth pressed together. Adeline looked at Damien DeLuca. 3 months, she said. Legitimate work. That's the agreement. That's the agreement, he said, and the debt is gone. All of it. She pushed her chair back and stood. Her legs felt strange, not weak, but newly load-bearing, as though her body was redistributing weight it had been carrying in the wrong places for a long time. I'll get my coat, she said. She walked to the hallway. The house was quiet around her, quiet in its expensive, carefully maintained way, the quiet of rooms that have been arranged to project stability while the foundation below them quietly cracks. She pulled her coat from the closet. A dark wool coat, not the nicest one, not the ruined green one that had been Vivian's casualty 2 winters ago after an argument about attendance at a charity event. This one. This was the one she was wearing tonight, She heard Vivian's voice from the dining room, low, urgent, not performing now, actually urgent. "Richard, stop her! You cannot let her—" And her father's voice, even lower, "What do you want me to do, Vivian?" Not a question. The absence of a question. The voice of a man who had run out of answers so long ago that the shape of a question had become foreign to him. Adeline buttoned her coat. She walked back to the dining room doorway and stopped. Damien was on his feet. He looked at her coat, at the expression on her face, measuring something. She didn't know what. And whatever he measured apparently satisfied whatever standard he was applying, because he simply said, "Car's outside," and moved toward the door. She looked at her father one last time. He was still sitting at the head of the Christmas table, surrounded by food no one was going to eat and decorations no one was looking at anymore. And he was 62 years old, and he looked it, suddenly, for the first time. Not the practiced 62 of a man who has spent decades maintaining the image of authority. Just a man. Just an old man sitting at a table that was never really his, in a house that would shortly belong to the bank, wearing an expression that might have been shame or might have been relief, or might have been both at once in some proportion that even he couldn't identify. She did not say goodbye. She walked through the dining room, through the entrance hall, past the front closet where her coats hung in a row, past the oak newel post she used to grip when she was a child sliding down the banister, past the framed photograph on the wall of herself and her father taken at some holiday 12 or 13 years ago, when the photograph had seemed to document something real. The front door was open. Cold air pressed against her like a hand, insistent and immediate, carrying the smell of winter. Clean, specific, the smell of snow and pine and cold stone. The snow on the front step was undisturbed except for Damien's footprints, which were already beginning to fill. A black car was idling at the end of the driveway. She could see the exhaust rising in the cold air, a steady pale column against the dark sky. Behind her, through the walls and the closed windows, she could hear Vivian's voice starting again. The volume rising now that there was no audience to maintain composure for, the real voice beneath the performance, finally audible. "This is not over, Richard. This is not—" Adeline pulled the front door closed behind her. The voice disappeared. Snowflakes landed on her face, on the aching skin of her left cheek, and the cold was extraordinary, exact and merciless and deeply impersonal. It didn't care about Christmas. It didn't care about any of them. It was just cold, doing what cold does, indifferent to human arrangements. She walked down the front path. Damien was standing beside the car. He hadn't pulled his coat collar up against the cold, hadn't hunched his shoulders. He was simply standing there, in the snow, with the patience of a man who had spent his life in conditions considerably worse than a December evening. He looked at the left side of her face again. The bruise was going to be something by morning. She knew that from the weight of the ache that was now steady and deep in the bone. He looked at it, and his jaw shifted, almost imperceptibly, and he looked away. "You don't have to come," he said. She stopped walking. "You just offered a $6 million debt cancellation for my employment." "I did." "That's a considerable commitment for someone you're giving an exit to." He was quiet for a moment. The snow fell between them. "The offer stands either way," he said. "The debt is over. You can walk back in there if you want." A pause. "But I don't think you want to." She looked back at the house. Through the living room window, she could see the Christmas tree lights blinking steadily, the carefully arranged ornaments, the tinsel that Vivian had draped with such geometric precision that it looked like a photograph of a Christmas tree rather than an actual Christmas tree. Beautiful and hollow. Completely hollow, all the way through. She looked at the car. She looked at the man standing beside it, who had walked uninvited into a room where a woman was being hurt and had simply refused to look away, which was something no one had done in 6 years. She got in the car. The driver pulled out of the Whitmore driveway at 9:47 on Christmas Eve. Snow was still falling. The house disappeared in the rear window. The holiday lights, the perfect facade, the performance that would continue inside even without its most convenient audience. She watched it go until the car turned onto the main road and the house was gone. She faced forward. Her cheek ached. Her hands were cold. She was in a car belonging to the most feared man in the city, heading to a destination she hadn't asked about, on the basis of a decision she had made in less than 3 minutes. For the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, she felt something in her chest that was not dread. She didn't have a word for it yet. She sat with it in the dark and the quiet, watching the snow-covered streets move past the window. And somewhere on the elevated highway that curved above the old part of the city, she became aware that Damien DeLuca was watching her from the opposite seat, not staring, just watching. The way someone watches when they've noticed something they weren't expecting. She didn't look at him. "You should have cried," he said. "Most people would have cried." "I know," she said. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have, by some improbable sequence of events, found themselves in the same unfamiliar territory and are each, separately, deciding how to proceed. She watched the city move past the window. Dark buildings, lit windows, streets empty and white and strange, in the way that cities get strange on Christmas Eve. All the ordinary machinery of human routine paused, and the underlying bones of the place exposed. It was almost beautiful. It was almost like starting over. The car went on through the snow. Neither of them spoke again until the driver turned through a set of iron gates, and Adeline saw for the first time what Damien DeLuca's house looked like from the outside. Tall and stone and lit from below, the kind of house that has stood in one place long enough that it has stopped feeling like someone's property and started feeling like geography, like something that simply exists the way rivers and hillsides exist, without apology and without explanation. The gates closed behind them. She looked at them in the side mirror, solid iron, the quiet automated certainty of them swinging shut. And that was when she understood that the Christmas dinner was over. The performance was over. The life she had been living inside that house, inside that family, inside the careful construction Vivian had built around her. That was over. What came next? She didn't know. But the gates were closed and the snow was still falling. And somewhere on the other side of that locked door was a man who had, without explanation, walked into the wreckage of her evening and asked her what she wanted. She was going to find out what that meant. She was going to find out what he actually was, beneath the stillness and the reputation and the particular quality of his silence in the car just now. She was going to find out, and she already knew, with the specific instinct of a woman who has survived 6 years of one kind of danger, that whatever she was walking toward was going to require something from her she had never been permitted to use before. The car stopped. The driver opened her door. Cold air again. Snow on the stone steps. A door ahead of her, heavy and dark, and light behind it. She got out of the car. She walked forward. The door opened before she reached it. Not by Damien, who had moved ahead and stood to one side, but by someone inside, an employee. A man in his 50s who nodded at her with the neutral courtesy of someone who has seen many things arrive at this door and has learned to receive all of them without surprise. She stepped inside. Warmth. The smell of something burning in a fireplace somewhere deep in the house. The specific hush of a large building where the people inside have learned to move quietly. Damien stepped in behind her and the door closed, and she heard, faintly from somewhere impossibly far away now, a siren moving through the city. She wondered if it was going toward her father's house. She wondered if Vivian had called the police. She wondered if she should care. The warmth of the house moved into her coat, into her bones, into the cold skin of her aching cheek, and she stood in the entrance of Damien DeLuca's home on Christmas Eve and felt the warmth work its way in. Outside in the city she had just left, Vivian Ashcroft was picking up her phone. She was not calling the police. She was calling someone else entirely, and the number she was dialing was one that no one in the Whitmore household was supposed to know. The number Vivian dialed connected on the second ring. She was standing in the kitchen by then. The dining room was unbearable, all that food and candlelight, and the ghost of 12 people who had witnessed her humiliation and would spend their Christmas Eve describing it to their spouses in exact detail. She had sent Richard upstairs, not because she needed privacy, but because looking at him made her want to break something, and the things within reach were all expensive. "It's done," she said when the line picked up. She left with him. A pause on the other end, then a voice, male, carefully neutral, the voice of a man who had trained himself out of every vocal register that might convey surprise. "You're certain?" I watched her get in the car. Vivian pressed 2 fingers against her temple. "I need to know if you can still move on this." "Moving on DeLuca requires more than an opportunity," the voice said. "It requires leverage." "She's the leverage," Vivian said. "She's in his house. She's going to be around his business, his operation. If she's willing, is she willing? Vivian was quiet for a moment. She looked at the kitchen counter, at the serving dishes Adeline had spent the afternoon filling, at the used apron folded over the oven handle, at all the small evidence of a person who had existed in this house for 6 years in the capacity of unpaid labor and convenient target. She won't be willing, she said. She doesn't know what I need from her. Then she's not leverage, the voice said. She's a variable. I'll manage the variable. Vivian's voice had gone flat and certain, the voice she used when she had already decided something and the conversation was merely administrative. What I need from you is a timeline. Can you move against DeLuca inside the next month if I give you information about his operation? Another pause, longer this time. If the information is actionable, yes. It will be, Vivian said. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen for another minute, very still, the phone warm in her hand. Then she walked to the liquor cabinet, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, and drank it standing up. Richard appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was still in his dinner jacket, which looked absurd now, the costume of a performance that had already closed. He looked at the bourbon glass. He didn't say anything about it. You let her walk out of here, he said. She made her own choice. You could have stopped her. Vivian set the glass down precisely in the center of the counter. No, she said. I couldn't have. And you couldn't have either. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner we can focus on what actually matters. She's my daughter. She's $22,000 in annual household expense and 6 years of liability, Vivian said. And right now she's sitting in Damien DeLuca's car, which means she's exactly where she needs to be. Richard stared at her. What does that mean? It means go to bed, Richard. She picked up the glass again. I'll handle this. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression she had seen on his face before, the expression of a man who suspects something but has long since concluded that the cost of knowing for certain exceeds what he can afford to pay. He turned and went back upstairs. Vivian drank the rest of the bourbon. She was thinking about a name she had been keeping in reserve for 2 years, the way you keep a key you're not sure you'll need but aren't willing to throw away. The name belonged to a man named Carver Solis, who ran the Eastern Distribution Network for a syndicate that had been in quiet conflict with the DeLuca organization for the better part of a decade. She had been introduced to Solis at a fundraiser 18 months ago, introduced casually, the way people get introduced at fundraisers, and she had filed him away with the same careful efficiency she applied to all potentially useful things. She had not expected to need him this soon. She looked at the kitchen window. Outside, the snow was still falling on the empty driveway. On the tire tracks the car had left pulling away. She could still see the shape of them, the specific curve of the turn, already beginning to fill. She refilled the glass. She began to plan. Peace. Adeline slept badly. The room they gave her was on the 3rd floor of Damien's house. Large, quiet, smelling faintly of cedar and something else she couldn't identify, a cleaning product, or a wood polish, or simply the accumulated scent of a well-maintained old building. The bed was enormous, and she lay in the center of it and stared at the ceiling and felt the pulse in her cheek like a second heartbeat. Around 2 a.m, she gave up and went to the window. The city spread below and to the east, dark and white, and mostly still. A few moving headlights on the distant highway, the orange glow of a convenience store 3 blocks down. Snow on rooftops. Snow on parked cars. The specific silence of a city that has paused for the holiday, all its ordinary noise held in suspension. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. She was thinking about the phone call. Not Vivian's phone call. She didn't know about that yet. She was thinking about the call she had not made, the one to her friend Petra, who lived across town and who had left 3 unanswered texts on Adeline's phone during the dinner. She hadn't answered them. She hadn't answered anything. She had simply left. She pulled the phone out and looked at it. Petra's last text read, "You okay?" You went quiet. That was at 9:30. It was now 2:14. She typed, "I'm okay. Something happened. I'll explain when I can." She stared at it. Then she sent it, put the phone face down on the windowsill, and looked back out at the snow. Something happened was the most compressed and inadequate description of the evening she could construct. She had been slapped at the Christmas dinner table. A man who ran organized crime in this city had walked through the door. She had agreed to work for him. She had left the only home she'd had access to for the last 6 years, at 9:47 on Christmas Eve, in a car she hadn't called, toward a house she'd never seen. And now she was here, and the bruise on her face was dark enough to see in the window's reflection, and her hands were steady on the glass. The steady hands were the thing she kept returning to. They had no business being steady. She went back to bed. She didn't sleep, but she lay still, and stillness was enough. Morning came gray and cold. She heard the house before she saw it. Voices below, the sound of movement, the particular density of a building with multiple people awake and operating in it. She dressed in yesterday's clothes and came downstairs and found the kitchen occupied by a woman in her 60s named Carla, who managed the household with the cheerful, implacable efficiency of someone who has been doing a specific job for so long that it has ceased to be a job and become simply the shape of her days. Carla gave Adeline coffee without being asked and looked at the bruise on her face without comment. "Mr. DeLuca is in the East Study," she said. "He's expecting you at 9. It was 8:40. Adeline drank the coffee standing at the kitchen counter and felt the warmth of it move through her, which was the closest thing to comfort she'd felt in roughly 12 hours. The kitchen was warm and large and utilitarian in a way the Whitmore kitchen had never been. That kitchen had been arranged for display, for the impression of domesticity without the actual labor of it. This kitchen was arranged for use. There was a difference she felt in her body rather than her mind, a kind of release in the shoulders. She found the East Study at 7 minutes to 9. Damien was already at his desk. He was in a different suit, dark charcoal, no tie again, the collar button open at his throat. And he had a phone to his ear when she entered, but he held up one finger and gestured to the chair across the desk without breaking whatever conversation he was managing. She sat. She listened to his side of it, which was brief and largely numerical. Figures, dates, a single firm negative on something she couldn't identify. And then he set the phone down and looked at her. He looked at the bruise on her face. His jaw moved, that same almost imperceptible shift she'd seen last night in the driveway. He looked away. "How do you feel?" he said. It was not asked with particular softness. It was asked with the direct practicality of a man who wants a specific answer to a specific question. "Fine," she said. "That's not an answer." "The bruise is worse this morning than it was last night," she said. "I slept in intervals. The room is good. The coffee is good." She paused. "That's all of it." He studied her for a moment. "Okay," he said. He opened the folder on his desk and turned it toward her. "These are the 3 primary business structures you'll be managing: real estate acquisitions, logistics contracting, and a restaurant group that's been hemorrhaging money for 18 months because no one's been watching the accounts closely." He pointed at the 3rd section. "That last one is yours first. I need to know where the losses are coming from by the end of next week." She looked at the folder. Numbers, property listings, contract summaries, financial statements going back 4 quarters. She picked it up and started reading, and the reading itself was steadying in the particular way that concrete work is steadying. It gave her mind somewhere specific to go instead of circling. "You have a background in accounting," he said. "Not a question. Finance degree. 2 years at an audit firm before my father asked me to come home and help manage the household." She turned a page. Manage was the word he used. Damien said nothing. He turned back to his own work. They sat in silence for 40 minutes, which should have been uncomfortable and was not, which was itself a strange and notable thing. It was Marcus who broke it. Marcus was Damien's second. She met him when he knocked twice and entered without waiting. A man in his mid-30s with a face that looked like it had been introduced to a few doors and had formed no particular grudge about it. He was carrying a tablet and wearing an expression that meant news Damien wasn't going to enjoy. "We've got a problem," Marcus said. He glanced at Adeline, back to Damien. "I can come back." "She stays," Damien said. Marcus absorbed this with a single nod, the nod of a man who has learned that his employer's decisions are not opening positions. Solis moved on the Hartwell Street warehouse last night, 3 in the morning. They took the manifests and left the merchandise. Damien set his pen down. "They took the paperwork, just the paperwork, left everything else, which means they weren't there for what was in the building. They were there for documentation." Marcus turned the tablet around. Photographs from a security system, timestamp 3:07 a.m., figures in the warehouse moving with the focused efficiency of people who know exactly what they're looking for and where to find it. Clean entry, clean exit. 40 minutes inside. Our guy at the door had a quiet night, which means they handled him before he knew they were there. Damien looked at the photographs for a long time. His face was very still. How did they know about the warehouse? He said. Marcus shook his head slowly. We're running that now. Short list of people who had that location. Very short. How short? 6 names, including 2 people in this house. The room was quiet. Adeline looked at her financial statements and understood that she was now present in a conversation she had not been cleared for, and that leaving was no longer a viable option, because leaving would communicate something she didn't want to communicate, which was that she had something to protect. She kept reading. Damien looked at her. She felt it without looking up. You didn't tell anyone where you were going last night, he said. I didn't know where I was going last night, she said. I got in a car. I didn't have an address. A pause. Your stepmother. She looked up. What about her? She made a call approximately 11 minutes after you left the house. We monitor calls placed to certain numbers. The number she dialed connects to a relay that we've been tracking for 8 months. He said it with the same flat factual quality he used for everything else. She called Carver Solis. Adeline set the folder down. She thought about Vivian in the kitchen. Vivian with her bourbon and her calculation. Vivian who had already begun pivoting before the car had cleared the driveway. Vivian who treated disruption as material rather than disaster, because Vivian had never in her life encountered a situation she couldn't convert into a transaction. She thought about all of this and felt something move through her that was not quite anger and not quite grief and was somewhere in the specific geography between them. The particular feeling of having a suspicion confirmed that you had hoped would remain a suspicion. She called him the same night, she said, 40 minutes after you left. And last night someone hit your warehouse. Yes. Adeline looked at Marcus, then back at Damien. You think she gave Solis something? Information about your operation? I think she called a man who has been trying to build a case against my organization for 2 years, Damien said. And I think she called him 8 hours before someone who works for that man walked into my warehouse and took every document connecting my logistics contracts to 6 different properties. He said it without inflection. What I don't think is coincidental. Marcus was watching Adeline now with the particular focused attention of a man whose entire professional function is the identification of threats. She held it. She didn't look away. I don't know what Vivian knows about your operation, she said. I didn't know you had a warehouse on Hartwell Street until 30 seconds ago. I didn't know Carver Solis existed until you said the name. Marcus said, her being here and Solis moving on the same night is a coincidence, Damien said. His voice was flat. Marcus looked at him. It's a coincidence, Damien said again. The second time it was quieter and considerably more definitive. Keep running the 6 names. Pull the warehouse logs for the last 30 days. I want to know which of those names accessed that location in the last month. He looked at Adeline. You're not the problem. She breathed. She hadn't known she'd stopped. But your stepmother is, he said. My stepmother, Adeline said carefully, is going to do whatever makes her position more secure. Whatever she told Solis, she told him because she thought it bought her something. Information for access. Access for protection. Protection for leverage over you. That's how she operates. She said it without satisfaction, just accurately. She doesn't care what happens to me in this house or what happens to your operation. She cares about surviving whatever comes next, and she'll build her survival out of whatever materials are available. Damien looked at her steadily. And you? And me what? What do you care about? She met his eyes. They were very dark and very direct, and they were asking an actual question, not a rhetorical one, and she understood that the answer mattered more than the answer to almost anything she'd been asked in the last 6 years. Getting through 90 days, she said. Doing the work. Going somewhere after this that isn't where I've been. She paused. That's all. Marcus left the room without being dismissed, which told her that the two of them had a working language developed over many years, a grammar of small signals that operated below the surface of explicit instruction. She noted this. She noted everything. It was what 6 years of survival in a hostile household had trained her to do. Read the room, read the people, read the space between what was said and what was meant. What was meant in this room, this morning, was something she wasn't ready to name. She picked up the folder. She went back to the financial statements. The restaurant group's losses were clustered in the third quarter, and the pattern in the numbers was specific enough that she could already see the shape of what had happened. Your restaurant accounts, she said. Damien looked up. The losses aren't operational. They're not food cost, not labor, not real estate. She turned the page toward him and pointed at a column of figures. Someone's been running duplicate invoices through the supply chain. Same vendor, same line item, billed twice per quarter going back 6 months. Whoever set it up was careful enough that it looks like an accounting error. She looked at him. It's not an accounting error. He looked at the figures. Something moved behind his eyes. Name on the vendor account. She checked the documentation. Hartwell Supply Group. The silence that followed was approximately 3 seconds long and contained, she understood, considerably more information than 3 seconds usually held. Damien sat back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment with the expression of a man who has just watched 2 separate problems reveal themselves as one problem. Hartwell Street Warehouse, Marcus said from the doorway. He'd come back without knocking. His face was doing something that wasn't quite alarm and wasn't quite admiration, but was somewhere in the specific territory of a man recalibrating rapidly. Hartwell Supply Group. Same name, Damien said. Same name, Marcus confirmed, which means someone set up the invoice fraud months ago, and last night they went to the warehouse to remove the paper trail before anyone found it. Adeline set the folder down very carefully on the edge of the desk. Someone inside your organization, she said, has been working with Solus for at least 6 months. The room processed this. Someone on that list of 6, Marcus said. Damien looked at him. I want every one of them in this building by noon. Marcus left at something close to a run. Adeline looked at the financial statements spread across the desk and understood that what had begun as 90 days of executive work in a man's legitimate business had just become something considerably more complicated. The ground had shifted in the night while she was lying awake in the cedar-smelling room and watching the ceiling, shifted in ways she hadn't seen and hadn't caused and couldn't undo. She was inside it now, not as a hostage, not as an asset, not as a debt payment, as the person who had found the thread that, when pulled, was going to unravel something large and ugly and deeply dangerous. Damien looked at her across the desk. You found that in 40 minutes, he said. The pattern was there, she said. I just read the numbers. My accountant didn't find it. Then your accountant wasn't reading the numbers. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he picked up his phone, dialed, and said to whoever answered, I need the full vendor payment history for the restaurant group going back 2 years, tonight. He paused. No, tonight. He hung up. He looked at Adeline. You'll need the original contracts too. Yes, she said. I'll have them sent up. She nodded and turned back to the page in front of her. And for the next 2 hours they worked in the same room in the same silence. And outside the gray Christmas morning slowly brightened without warmth. And somewhere across the city in a house that smelled of bourbon and cooling food, Vivian Ashcroft was sitting at her kitchen table with her phone in her hands, reading a message from Carver Solis that said, First phase complete. Now we need the girl. The message on Vivian's phone read, First phase complete. Now we need the girl. She read it twice. Then she set the phone face down on the kitchen table and sat very still, the way she always sat when she was thinking through something that required precision. Not stillness born of calm, but the stillness of a mechanism under pressure. Every moving part pulled tight against every other moving part, the whole system humming at a frequency just below audible. She had not planned to use Adeline directly. That was the truth she sat with in the cold morning kitchen while Richard slept upstairs and the snow outside had stopped and the tire tracks in the driveway had filled completely, as though the car had never been there, as though the whole evening had been a weather event that passed and left no permanent mark. She had planned to use Adeline's proximity, the access she would have to DeLuca's operation, the documents she would handle, the conversations she would overhear. Passive intelligence, the kind you gather from a source who doesn't know they're a source. But Solus wanted more than that. She picked up the phone again and typed, Define need. His response came in under a minute. She's inside, we're not. Use her or lose the window. Vivian stared at the screen. She thought about Adeline at 7 years old, the year Vivian had married Richard, standing at the top of the staircase in this house, with her arms crossed and her chin up and her eyes dry in the specific way of a child who has decided that crying in front of strangers is a form of surrender. She had been a difficult child, not difficult in the way of tantrums or defiance, difficult in the way of a person who sees things clearly and cannot be persuaded to unsee them. It had made her inconvenient from the beginning. It made her useful now. Vivian typed, "Give me 72 hours." She put the phone in her pocket and went upstairs to wake Richard. Across the city, the 6 names arrived in Damien's building one by one between 11:30 and 12:15. Adeline watched them from the hallway as Marcus escorted each one to the conference room on the second floor. She wasn't supposed to be watching. She had been given a desk in the East Study and a stack of original vendor contracts and a clear directive to keep working. But she had stepped out for water and the hallway gave a clean angle to the staircase. And she was a person who, when she had an angle, used it. 5 men and 1 woman, all of them employed by DeLuca in various capacities. Logistics, property management, finance, security, all of them walking with the particular gait of people who have been summoned and know why and are managing, with varying degrees of success, the specific physical symptoms of that knowledge. Tight jaw, eyes that move too quickly, the studied neutrality of faces working very hard to project nothing. Marcus passed her on his way back down. He glanced at her. "You want to sit in?" he said. It was not quite a question. She thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. "Yes." He didn't look surprised. He didn't look anything. "Then come up when the first one's seated." She went back to the study, set down her water, picked up the vendor contract file, and went upstairs. The conference room was long and deliberately spare. A table, 8 chairs, no decorative anything. The kind of room that communicates through its own absence of comfort. Damien was already there, standing at the window with his back to the room, which she had begun to understand was a technique rather than a habit. He turned when she entered. He looked at the file under her arm. "You found more," he said. "The Hartwell Supply Group invoices connect to a shell structure," she said. 3 layers. Bottom layer is a holding company registered in a state with loose disclosure requirements. The signature on the original registration, she opened the file and set a page on the table, is a name I don't recognize, but the address listed is a property in your portfolio. Damien came to the table and looked at the page. His face did the thing it did when information arrived that completed a picture he hadn't been able to finish, a slight compression around the eyes. The look of a man whose patience with a particular situation has just run completely out. "Joel Raines," Marcus said from the doorway. He was looking at his tablet. "That address is the Kessler Street property. Joel Raines is on property management. He's one of the 6. Damien straightened. "Bring him first." Joel Raines was 44 years old and had worked for the DeLuca organization for 11 years. He was broad-shouldered and had the sunburned forearms of a man who spent time outdoors, and he entered the conference room with the careful composure of someone who had been rehearsing this moment since the summons came. He sat across from Damien without being told to sit, which was either confidence or the specific overcorrection of a man who needed to appear unafraid. Damien sat across from him. He did not have notes. He did not have the file. He simply sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at Joel Raines with the particular quality of attention that was Damien's most effective instrument, complete, unwavering, fully prepared to wait. Adeline sat at the far end of the table with the file open in front of her. Raines said, "If this is about the Hartwell property—" "It's about the Hartwell property," Damien said. "Then I can explain the variance in the maintenance logs. We had a contractor issue in Q2 that—" "Hartwell Supply Group," Damien said. Raines stopped. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Adeline watched Raines' hands on the table. He had them clasped together, and the knuckles shifted slightly, a micro-adjustment in the grip. "I don't know what that is," Raines said. "You incorporated it," Damien said, 14 months ago. Delaware registration, your signature, the Kessler Street property address. You billed my restaurant group through that entity for services that were never performed, duplicate invoiced for 6 quarters, and the payments cleared because someone in accounts payable was also on your arrangement. He said all of this in the same measured tone he used for everything. "I'm going to ask you one time to tell me who else is on it and what you gave Solus in exchange for the access that let you run it this long." Raines said nothing. "Joel." Damien's voice dropped, not in volume, but in temperature. You've been with me 11 years. I know your daughter's name. I know where your mother lives. I know every good decision you made in this organization because I was the one who gave you the chances to make them." He paused. "I also know that whatever solace offered you, you knew exactly what you were doing when you took it. So let's skip the part where you pretend otherwise." Raines's jaw was working. His eyes had gone to the table. "They came to me," he said finally. His voice had dropped, gone rough at the edges. 8 months ago. Said they had documentation from a previous deal that would put me inside. Said they'd move on it unless I helped them build a case against you." He looked up. "It wasn't a choice." "It was exactly a choice," Damien said. "They had my name on things I didn't—" "You came to me," Damien said. 11 years ago you came to me with nothing, and I gave you work and a living and a reason to get up in the morning, and when someone put pressure on you instead of walking through my door, you opened theirs." His voice remained even throughout. That was the thing Adeline kept noting. The evenness was not control over anger, it was something colder and more permanent than anger. "What did you give them?" Raines pressed his clasped hands against his mouth for a moment, a gesture that was almost prayer and was certainly desperation. "The warehouse location, 3 property addresses, a schedule of movement for the eastern logistics routes." Marcus, standing by the door, made a sound that was not quite a word. "And the warehouse last night," Damien said. "I didn't know they were going in last night." Raines looked up. He was sweating now, a thin shine across his forehead. "I gave them the location 2 weeks ago. What they did with it is on you," Damien said. "What they do with everything you gave them is on you." He stood. "Marcus." Marcus stepped forward. Raines stood up fast. Damien, listen to me. I have a family. I have a daughter who is 9 years old. Whatever you're going to do, whatever you think is—" "You should have thought about your daughter before you opened that door," Damien said. He said it without cruelty and without satisfaction, and that absence of both was somehow the worst version of it. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room again. "He doesn't leave the building. Find me the accounts payable contact." Raines was still standing. His hands were at his sides now, open, the specific posture of a man who has used up every available gesture and has nothing left to do with his body. Adeline watched him and felt something that was not sympathy and was not satisfaction, something more complicated and less comfortable than either. She looked at the file in front of her. She thought about Vivian's phone call. 40 minutes after she left. She thought about, "Now we need the girl." She didn't know about the message yet, but she felt the shape of it the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive. Something in the pressure of the morning, something in the specific sequence of events, the too neat timing of the warehouse hit and the invoice fraud and Raines and all of it, organized in a pattern that had a logic she couldn't fully see but could sense the edges of. She closed the file. She looked at Damien's back at the window. "This isn't the whole thing," she said. He turned. "Raines is a component," she said. "The invoice fraud, the warehouse, those are operational. They hurt your finances and your documentation and your logistics coverage, but they're not enough to bring you down." She kept her voice level. She was thinking out loud, which was a thing she had not been permitted to do in 6 years, and the act of it felt strange and necessary in equal measure. Solis needs something bigger, something that makes the case he can't make on paper, something that puts you in a room you can't walk out of. Damien looked at her. "He needs to put you in a position where you respond," she said, "publicly, violently, in a way that can be documented and used." She paused. "Which means he's going to create that position." Marcus looked at Damien. "She's right." "I know she's right," Damien said. His voice had gone somewhere quieter. He looked at Adeline. "Which means the next move isn't financial." "No," she said. "It isn't." Her phone buzzed on the table. She looked at it. Unknown number. She picked it up and looked at Damien, and something in her face must have communicated what the look on the screen communicated, because he said, "Answer it." She did. Vivian's voice came through the speaker, and it was not the performance voice, not the controlled warmth dinner party voice, not even the cold fury voice from last night. It was the stripped-down version, the voice beneath all the other voices, and hearing it without its usual armoring was in some ways more frightening than any version she had heard before. I need you to listen to me, Vivian said. I don't have time to do this carefully, so I'm going to be direct. Go ahead, Adeline said. I made a mistake. A pause. Not the debt, not your father's situation. The call I made last night. The person I called. Another pause, fractionally longer. He told me this morning what he wants from you, and I didn't know. When I called him, I didn't know he was going to... Her voice stopped. What does he want? Adeline said. He wants you to get him something from DeLuca's operation, specific documentation. He gave me the list. Vivian's voice had gone thin, and Adeline recognized the quality of it. It was the voice Vivian used when she was afraid, which was a voice she had heard exactly twice in 6 years, and both times had preceded something genuinely dangerous. And if you don't get it, he says he'll... She stopped again. What? He says he'll release documentation that puts your father in prison, not for the gambling debt, for the fraud, the forged collateral, the embezzlement. He has enough. A breath. Adeline, your father is 62 years old, and he is not... Her voice cracked, just slightly, just at the edge. He cannot survive. Adeline was looking at the table in front of her. She was aware of Damien watching her from across the room, and Marcus watching her from beside the door, and the particular weight of being watched by two men who are both trying to read the same thing in her face. What's on the list? She said. Adeline, what is on the list, Vivian? A pause. Paper rustling faintly. Then Vivian read it. 4 items. Property deeds for 2 buildings. A contract connecting the DeLuca logistics operation to a specific shell company. And a name of an informant inside a government agency who had been providing Damien with advance notification of investigations for the past 3 years. Adeline wrote nothing down. She held the 4 items in her memory with the same careful precision she applied to numbers. If I give him this, she said, what happens? He destroys DeLuca's operation, Vivian said. Prosecutions, asset seizures, the whole... And my father. He says he'll bury the fraud documentation. He says... Adeline repeated the 2 words with no inflection. Silence. Vivian. Adeline's voice had gone very flat and very quiet. You called this man 11 minutes after I left the house. You gave him information about DeLuca's operation before you knew what he was going to ask in return. She paused. What did you actually give him last night? No answer. Vivian. The warehouse location, Vivian said. Her voice had gone almost inaudible. And the name of the contact inside the agency. Adeline set the phone down on the table. She did not hang up. She set it down and looked at Damien. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Not anger, not calculation, but something rawer than either. Something that had the quality of a man who has just received news about something he had not fully allowed himself to care about until the moment it was threatened. She gave Solis the agency contact, Adeline said. Her voice was steady. She needed it to be steady. Last night, which means Solis knows who your informant is. Marcus said, if he moves on the contact before we can... He's already moved, Damien said. He was already reaching for his own phone. He dialed and waited, and the wait was 3 seconds too long, and she watched his face during those 3 seconds and saw the answer arrive before whoever was on the other end said a word. His jaw set. His eyes went flat. He lowered the phone. Tanner isn't answering. Tanner was, she understood, the name of the informant inside the agency. We need to get to him, Marcus said. We're too late to get to him, Damien said. If Solis moved on the warehouse at 3 this morning and moved on Tanner before dawn, then Tanner is already either compromised or gone. He looked at Adeline. And Solis knows that I know, which means he's already past the intelligence phase. He's moving to the pressure phase, she said. Yes. She picked up the phone. Vivian was still there. She could hear breathing, faint and unsteady. I need you to understand something, Adeline said. Whatever he told you, whatever he promised about protecting my father, he's going to use every piece of information you gave him, and then he's going to use you too, and there will be nothing left to protect when he's done. She said it without anger. It was simply true, and Vivian needed to hear it stated plainly rather than performatively. And Adeline had spent enough years watching Vivian perform that she understood the difference between what got through and what simply bounced off the surface. You need to tell me everything, every contact, Every piece of information you passed, every conversation, all of it. Not for DeLuca, for my father. The silence on the other end lasted a long time. Then Vivian said, in a voice stripped of everything except exhaustion, "Where do I go?" Adeline looked at Damien. He looked back at her. In the space between them was a calculation neither of them wanted to make out loud. Bringing Vivian Ashcroft into this building, into this operation, onto this side of the equation, after what she had done was a risk that had no clean analysis. She was a source of damage. She was also, potentially, the only complete picture of what Solis had. Damien gave a single short nod. "I'll send an address," Adeline said, and hung up. She set the phone down and looked at her own hands on the table. They were steady. She noted this with the detached curiosity she'd felt the night before at the window, that the steadiness had no business being there, and yet there it was. "Your stepmother is coming here," Marcus said. He said it like a man identifying something that has appeared in a room and needs to be correctly classified before anything else happens. "Yes," Adeline said. "She burned your contact. She triggered the warehouse hit. I know what she did," Adeline said. "Then why?" "Because she knows what Solis has and what he's planning and how far along he is," she said. "And because my father—" She stopped, started again. "Because there are two people in this situation who did something unforgivable, and one of them is already in your conference room, and the other one is the only person left who can help us understand what's coming." She looked at Marcus. "I know what she is. I'm not asking you to trust her. I'm asking you to use her." Marcus looked at Damien. Damien was looking at Adeline. "You've been here," he said quietly, "less than 24 hours. "I know," she said. "And you just positioned yourself between my operation and the woman who helped dismantle part of it." "Yes." He held her gaze for a long moment. Whatever he was reading in her face, he appeared to find it sufficient. He looked at Marcus. "Make room." Marcus left. Damien looked at her for another moment, one more second than necessary, long enough to be intentional. And then he turned back to the window. Outside, the December sky had gone the flat white of a day that has made its decision about color and committed to it. The city below moved in its ordinary patterns, cars and pedestrians, and the distant mechanical rhythm of a place that does not pause for anyone's crisis. And in a building 40 minutes away, Carver Solis was looking at a photograph taken from a camera positioned across the street from Damien DeLuca's front gate, a photograph taken 40 minutes ago, time-stamped and clear, showing a woman in a dark wool coat getting out of a car and walking up the stone steps. He sent the photograph to 3 separate phones with a single line of text. "Confirm target. Begin." Vivian arrived at 40 minutes past 2. She came in a car she had called herself, not a car anyone had sent, which told Adeline something about her stepmother's current state, that she was moving under her own logic now, not waiting for instruction, which was either a sign of genuine panic or the specific recalibration of a woman who had decided to change sides and wanted the gesture to be legible. She stepped out of the car in the same burgundy dress from the night before, no coat, and the cold hit her like a physical correction. She stood on the stone steps with her arms crossed against the temperature and looked at the door and did not move for approximately 3 seconds. Then she moved. Adeline met her in the entrance hall. She had decided against having Marcus there, against having anyone there, because the conversation that needed to happen between them was not one that would survive an audience. Vivian stopped when she saw her. She looked at the bruise on Adeline's face. It had gone dark overnight, purple and deep, visible even in the low light of the entrance hall. And something moved through her expression that was complicated and did not resolve cleanly into any single identifiable thing. "You need ice on that," she said. "I needed ice on it 14 hours ago," Adeline said. "Come in." She brought her to a sitting room off the main hall. Not the conference room, not the study, a smaller room with 2 chairs and a low table and a window that looked out on the side garden where snow still covered the ground in an undisturbed flat white. She closed the door. She did not sit. Vivian sat. She sat the way she always sat, spine straight, weight forward, the posture of a woman who treats even a chair as a position to be held rather than a surface to rest on. But her hands, when she placed them on her knees, were not still. Adeline noticed the slight continuous movement of the fingers against the fabric of the dress. "Tell me everything," Adeline said. "From the beginning." Not from last night. From the beginning. Vivian looked at her. How long have you known Solis? Adeline said. I told you, 18 months. How long have you been passing him information? A pause. 7 months. Before the warehouse, before last night. Yes, Adeline held this. 7 months. The invoice fraud had been running for 6 quarters, 18 months. Rains had been recruited 8 months ago. The timeline assembled itself in her mind with the quiet, mechanical precision of numbers falling into columns. What did you give him before last night? Movement schedules, property addresses, the name of one contact inside the city planning office. Vivian's voice was flat and deliberate, the voice of a woman giving a deposition. Nothing about the agency informant. I found that name in Richard's files 4 months ago. I didn't give it to Solis until last night. Why last night? Because he asked for it. She looked at her hands. He said the warehouse operation was the final piece, that he needed the contact name to complete the legal case, that after that, he'd burn everything connecting Richard to the fraud. I believed him. You believed him, Adeline said. Vivian looked up. Her eyes were clear and direct and contained, Adeline thought, the specific quality of a person who has spent the last several hours arriving at an understanding they cannot unarrive at. I made a decision that I thought protected this family. I was wrong. She said it without performance, without the softening qualifications that usually accompanied her admissions. Just the statement, clean and unadorned. I was wrong, and now I'm here. What does he want from me specifically? Vivian reached into the pocket of her dress and removed a folded piece of paper. She held it out. Adeline took it and unfolded it and read it. 4 items. The same 4 items Vivian had read over the phone, but there was a 5th one written at the bottom in different handwriting. Added recently, the ink slightly different, the pressure of the pen harder. A name, an account number, the location of a safe inside the DeLuca property. Adeline looked at it. He added this. This morning, after I told him you were here. Vivian's jaw was tight. He said if you got him what was in that safe, he'd consider the arrangement complete. And if I don't, then he releases the fraud documentation and your father goes to prison. A pause. And he does something else, something he didn't specify, and the fact that he didn't specify it is... She stopped. More frightening than if he had, Adeline said. Yes. Adeline folded the paper. She walked to the window. Outside, the side garden was very still, the snow unmarked, the bare branches of a line of trees along the far wall casting thin shadows across the white. She stood there and looked at it and processed what she was holding. Not just the paper, but the whole accumulated weight of the last 18 hours. The Christmas dinner and the car and the cedar room and the financial statements and Joel Raines's sweating face and Vivian's stripped-down voice on the phone, and now this paper with its 5th item in different ink. She turned around. You're going to tell Damien everything you just told me, she said. All of it. The 7 months, the specific information, the dates, everything. Vivian's expression shifted. And then what? And then we figure out what Solis is actually planning, because a man who has been building this operation for 7 months and recruited an inside source and hit the warehouse and burned the agency contact in a single 24-hour window is not doing any of that to build a legal case. She looked at Vivian steadily. He's building towards something else, and I need to know what. She opened the sitting room door. Marcus was in the hallway. He had been in the hallway, she was fairly certain, since Vivian arrived. Get Damien, she said. Go. The meeting lasted 40 minutes and was not comfortable for anyone in the room. Vivian spoke with the deliberate, controlled accuracy of a person who has decided that precision is their remaining currency, and she spent it carefully, laying out every contact, every date, every transferred piece of information with the methodical thoroughness of someone dismantling their own position brick by brick. Damien listened without interrupting. Marcus recorded. Adeline sat at the end of the table and watched both of them, and felt the specific tension of a room in which multiple people are simultaneously recalculating everything. When Vivian finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Damien said, The safe. Vivian looked at him. He knows it exists. How? I don't know. I didn't tell him. Damien looked at Marcus. Marcus pulled up something on his tablet, read it, looked at Damien. Rains, he said. In his access logs. He pulled the property schematics for this building 8 weeks ago. Damien was quiet. He was doing the thing Adeline had begun to recognize. Not the stillness of a man controlling his response, but the stillness of a man whose response has already been decided, and what remained was simply the identification of the correct sequence of actions. Solis doesn't want legal documentation, he said. Not primarily. No, Adeline said. What's in the safe is operational. If it leaves this building, it doesn't go to a prosecutor. It goes to his own operation. He looked at Vivian. He's been running this as an intelligence acquisition, not a legal case, a takeover. Vivian's face had gone very still. He told you legal case, Damien said. He told Richard leverage. He told Rain's protection. He looked at each thing in sequence, calmly. He told everyone the version of the story that made their cooperation feel rational. His eyes moved to the window. He's not interested in destroying my organization. He wants to own it. The room processed this. Then the exposure threat against my father, Adeline said. Real, Damien said. He'll use it. Not to protect himself, to move you. He needs you inside this building, with access, and he needs you motivated. He looked at her, which means he's going to escalate. He's going to do something in the next... He checked his watch. Few hours that makes you feel like you have no choice. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number again. Different unknown number. She answered. It wasn't Vivian this time. It wasn't anyone she recognized. A man's voice, level, professional, the voice of someone delivering a message rather than having a conversation. Ms. Whitmore, Mr. Solis would like you to know that your father was taken into custody 40 minutes ago. Federal agents. The fraud documentation was filed this morning. A pause. Mr. Solis would also like you to know that this can be reversed. He has the relationships to reverse it. He'll be in touch with specific instructions. The line went dead. She lowered the phone. She looked at Vivian. Vivian's face had gone the color of the snow outside. He moved on Richard, Adeline said. Vivian stood up. Her chair scraped back against the floor. He said, he told me, he lied to you, Adeline said. She said it without satisfaction. There was no satisfaction available in this particular moment. No currency of told you so that was worth anything in a room where her 62-year-old father had just been arrested on a December afternoon. She stood very still and felt the information settle into her body with the heavy, specific weight of something real and irreversible. He lied to you, and he moved on Richard before I could move on anything, which means the threat was never the threat. The threat was the motivation. Damien stood. He moved to the window. His hands were at his sides, and she could see in the set of his shoulders the particular contained force of a man who has been maneuvered into a position he did not choose and has now fully arrived at his response. He wants you to panic, he said. He was not talking to Vivian. He was talking to Adeline. He wants you to move fast without thinking because you're scared for your father. He wants you to take something from this house and walk out the door with it. I know, she said. If you do that, I know, she said again. He turned and looked at her. What do you want to do? The question landed the way his questions always landed, without cushioning, without the implicit offer of a suggested answer, just the bare question directed at her, as though her answer were the only relevant variable. She thought about her father in a federal holding facility in a dinner jacket he'd been wearing since last night, 62 years old and terrified in the specific muted way of a man who has spent decades watching other people face consequences and has now been handed his own. She thought about him staring at the tablecloth while Vivian's hand came down across her face. She thought about every moment he had chosen not to act, not to protect, not to stand between her and the thing that was hurting her. And she held all of that alongside the image of him in that holding facility. And she did not try to resolve the contradiction, because the contradiction was not resolvable. She loved him. She was angry at him. Both things were fully true and fully present, and neither one canceled the other. I want to get my father out, she said, without giving Solis anything from this house, without running, without handing him the win he's designed this whole sequence to get. She paused. Which means we need to give him something that looks like what he wants long enough to get ahead of him. Marcus looked at Damien. Damien looked at Adeline. Go on, he said. He needs me to bring something out of this building, she said. He's watching the front, probably the back. He knows I know what he wants. What he doesn't know is whether I'm going to choose my father over your operation or your operation over my father. She looked at the paper on the table, the fifth item, the safe, the account number. We give him a reason to think I chose my father. We make it look like I'm moving. And then we're where he wants us, Marcus said. Out in the open, on his timeline. Yes, she said, we're where he wants us. Except we know what he's planning and he doesn't know we know. She looked at Marcus. What's in the safe? A pause. Documents, Damien said. Property deeds, some financial records. Nothing that isn't duplicated elsewhere in this building. So we can move it. Yes. Then we move it, she said. Tonight. We move it to wherever Solus expects it to be moved, and when he goes to take it, he walks into a room we've already prepared, Marcus said. He said it the way someone says something when they have fully arrived at understanding, and the understanding is both correct and dangerous. Yes, Adeline said. The room was quiet for a moment. Vivian was standing beside her chair with her arms crossed, and her face composed in the way of a woman who has heard herself outmaneuvered and is working through the specific experience of that. She looked at Adeline with an expression that was not quite recognition and not quite apology, but was something in the space between the two. The look of a person encountering, perhaps for the first time, an accurate version of someone they thought they knew. She said nothing. We need a location, Damien said. He was already moving. Already in the transition from deliberation to execution that Adeline was beginning to understand was his natural state. Not the stillness was where he lived, the stillness was where he waited, and this was the end of waiting. Somewhere he'll believe. Somewhere he can move on without triggering everything he's been careful not to trigger. There's an abandoned building on Calloway, Marcus said. Former theater. We've used it before. He'll know it, Damien said. He'll know it, Marcus confirmed. Which is why he'll believe it. Damien looked at Adeline. You're the one he needs to see moving. You're the one who has to walk out of here with something in her hands and get in a car and go to Calloway. He said it plainly, without apology and without the performance of reluctance, because he was not a man who prettied up the ugly parts of a plan. If it's anyone else, he pulls back. If it's you, he moves, she said. Yes. She looked out of the window. The gray December light was going toward dark now, the short winter day already folding itself up. Out there, in a car parked somewhere with an angle on this building, someone was watching the gate and waiting for her to appear. She thought about the oak tree in the front yard of the Whitmore house, the one she used to climb when she needed to disappear. She thought about sitting up in it as a child and watching cars move through the street below and imagining a life that belonged to someone else. She was not in that tree anymore. All right, she said. You don't have to... Damien started. I know I don't have to, she said. She looked at him. How long do you need to get people to Calloway? 2 hours. Then we leave in 2 hours. She walked to the door and stopped. She turned back. Vivian was still standing beside the chair, still with her arms crossed, still with that expression that had no clean name. I'm going to get him out, Adeline said to her. Not warmly, not coldly. Just factually, the way you state a thing you have decided. Not for you, for him. She held Vivian's gaze for a moment. When this is over, what you did is still what you did. That doesn't change. Vivian said nothing. Adeline walked out. 2 hours went fast and slow at the same time. The way time moves when the body understands that something is coming and begins to experience every minute as both too long and insufficient. She changed into darker clothing. Marcus found her something from the house, plain and close-fitting, the kind of clothing that didn't announce itself. She ate something standing at the kitchen counter because Carla put it in front of her and said, "Eat," with the specific authority of a woman who has seen many things pass through this kitchen and knows which ones require fuel. She ate. She didn't taste it. She went over the plan with Marcus 3 times. The documents they would pull from the safe were real. Real enough to be convincing, duplicated elsewhere, expendable. She would carry them in a bag. She would walk through the front gate at the time they specified, visible to whoever was watching. She would get in a car. The car would go to Calloway. Damien's people would already be inside the building on Calloway, 4 of them. Marcus would follow in a separate car with 3 more. Solus would see her arrive. Solis would move. That was the plan. Plans, she knew, had the specific vulnerability of requiring other people to behave predictably. Solis had not, so far, been entirely predictable. She found Damien in the East study at 5 minutes to 8. He was standing at his desk, not sitting, standing, which was different from his usual, with his phone in his hand and an expression on his face that she had not seen before. It was not the stillness. It was the thing that existed when the stillness had been pushed past its limits, and what was underneath it had risen briefly to the surface. He looked at her. "Tanner's dead," he said. She absorbed this. "When?" "They found him an hour ago. Made to look like—" He stopped. His jaw was tight. It wasn't. It was Solis cleaning up the evidence of the burn. He set his phone down on the desk with a careful, controlled precision that communicated everything it was designed not to communicate. "He's not pulling back. He's accelerating." "Then we accelerate," she said. "This is not what I—" He stopped again. He looked at her with that expression still on his face, the raw one, the one she wasn't sure he knew was visible. "When I came to your father's house last night, I didn't plan for this. I want to be clear about that." "I know," she said. "You've been in this building for less than 24 hours, and I am asking you to walk out the front gate as bait for a man who just killed someone." "You're not asking," she said. "I offered." "Adeline, don't," she said. Her voice was quiet and direct and held a firmness that surprised her with its own completeness. It had come from somewhere she hadn't known was fully operational until it needed to be. "Don't make this a thing you have to talk me into or talk me out of. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm walking into. I've spent 6 years in a house where someone was always trying to manage my decisions for my own good, and I am done being managed." She held his gaze. "Let me do this." He looked at her for a long moment. The expression on his face shifted, settled into something that was not the stillness but was a different kind of steadiness, the steadiness of a man who has heard something true and has chosen to honor it. "The car leaves at 8:15, he said. "I'll be at the gate," she said. She walked out of the study. In the entrance hall, she picked up the bag, dark canvas, the documents inside, and she stood for a moment with the weight of it in her hand and breathed. The house was quiet around her, warm, smelling of cedar and fireplace and the faint ghost of Carla's cooking. She stood in it and memorized it briefly, with the specific attention of someone who is not certain they will return. Then she opened the front door. Cold air hit her face, the bruised left side and the unbruised right side equally, indifferently. And she walked down the stone steps and through the iron gate and stood on the street outside Damien DeLuca's house in the December dark, visible to anyone watching. She did not look for the car she knew was there. She simply stood holding the bag, breathing the cold air, while 40 feet away in a parked sedan a man with a telephoto camera pressed the shutter and sent the image to Carver Solis with 3 words. "She's moving. Go." A black car pulled up. She got in. The driver said nothing. He pulled into traffic. He drove east, then north, then east again, the city moving past the windows in its nighttime configuration. Lit storefronts, dark office buildings, the orange spill of streetlights on wet pavement where snow had been compressed to slush by the hours of foot traffic. She watched it and kept her breathing even and held the bag on her lap and thought about her father in a holding room somewhere, and Damien setting his phone down with that careful, devastating precision, and Vivian's fingers moving against her knee, and Joel Raines with his clasped hands and the handprint on her face that had started all of this. One flat, sharp sound at a Christmas dinner that had been a performance for so long that the violence beneath it had simply been waiting for enough pressure to become visible. The car turned onto Calloway Street. The theater was halfway down the block, a large dark building, the old marquee stripped of letters. The facade in the specific state of decline that happens when a building is abandoned but maintained just enough to avoid demolition. Dark windows. A single light somewhere inside, visible through a gap in the boarded ground floor. The driver stopped. "I'll wait," he said. She got out. The cold was different here than at the house. Sharper, moving, carrying the smell of the river 2 blocks east. She walked toward the theater entrance, the bag in her right hand, her footsteps on the pavement the only sound on this block at this hour. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The lobby was large and dark and smelled of dust and old wood and the specific enclosed cold of a building that has not been heated in months. Her eyes adjusted. She could see the shape of the space. The old ticket booth, the double doors to the main hall, the staircase to the mezzanine on her left. She heard movement above her. Then the lights came on. Not the lights she had expected. Not Marcus. Not Damien's people moving into position. Lights from above, work lights strung across the mezzanine railing, flooding the lobby in a flat white glare. And in that glare she could see with complete and immediate clarity that the people standing in the mezzanine looking down at her were not the people she had expected to find here. 4 men. None of them faces she recognized. And at the center of the mezzanine, leaning against the railing with the particular ease of a man who has been waiting and is pleased that the wait is over, was Carver Solis. He was younger than she'd imagined, mid-40s, lean, with the unhurried quality of someone who has learned that patience is a form of dominance. He looked down at her with an expression of mild professional satisfaction. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I was hoping DeLuca would come himself." He paused. "But you'll do." She stood in the center of the lobby with the bag in her hand and the work lights in her face and understood with the cold precision of a person whose worst calculation has just been confirmed that Solis had known about the plan. He had let her walk into it anyway, because Solis didn't want the documents. He had never wanted the documents. He wanted her. Behind her, the door through which she had entered swung shut, and she heard the sound of a lock engaging, and somewhere in the city 40 minutes away, Damien DeLuca's phone began to ring. She did not run. That was the first decision, made in the half-second between the lock engaging and the next breath. She did not run, did not turn back toward the locked door, did not look for another exit with the panic-scanning eyes of someone whose body has taken over from their mind. She stood in the center of the lobby with the bag in her right hand and the work lights flat and white in her face, and she breathed. 1 breath, 2. Solis watched her from the mezzanine with the expression of a man who has seen many people receive bad news and rates them by how long it takes the composure to break. Hers did not break. "You knew," she said. "We picked up the secondary communication between DeLuca's man and the Callaway building about an hour ago," Solis said. He said it pleasantly, the way you admit to a minor advantage in a board game. "We adjusted. And you came anyway." "I came because you were coming." He pushed off the railing and moved to the top of the staircase. He came down 3 steps and stopped, staying above her. The positioning deliberate, the height maintained. "Ms. Whitmore, I want you to understand something. I don't have any interest in hurting you. You are a woman who has been used by everyone in proximity to her for the better part of a decade, and I have no desire to extend that tradition." "You arrested my father this morning," she said. "I facilitated a process that was already in motion," he said. "Your father committed federal fraud. The documentation existed before I touched it. I accelerated the timeline." He came down 2 more steps. "That can be reversed. I told your stepmother the truth about that part." "You told my stepmother what she needed to hear," Adeline said. "There's a difference." He smiled. It was a real smile. Not warm, but genuine. The smile of a man who appreciates precision. "Fair, he said. "But the offer stands. DeLuca's operation has been a problem in this city for 15 years. I've spent 2 years building the architecture to dismantle it. What I need from you is one thing, one piece of testimony, first-hand account of the operational structure. What you've seen in the last 24 hours is more than enough." "I've been in his house for 1 day. You found the invoice fraud in 40 minutes, Solis said. "You identified the Hartwell connection. You reconstructed the shell structure and traced it back to Rains before my people had finished pulling the warehouse manifests." He looked at her steadily. "You're not a woman who misses things, Miss Whitmore. What you saw in 24 hours is what my analysts have spent 2 years trying to document." He paused. "I'm asking you to talk to me. That's all." "That's not all," she said, "and you know it." He waited. "If I testify, DeLuca goes to prison," she said. "His people scatter. His organization dissolves, and you step into the vacuum." She looked up at him. "Which is what this has always been, not a legal case, not justice, a takeover. You want what he built, and you need the building cleared before you can move in." The smile faded, not into anger, into something more neutral and more honest. "You're not wrong," he said. But the outcome for the city is the same either way. DeLuca's operation ends. The question is, what fills the space? Better the devil I've met, she said. Is that what he is to you? After one day? She said nothing. One of the four men on the mezzanine shifted position. Her eyes tracked the movement without her head turning. A peripheral reading she had developed over years of monitoring a room from the edge of it. He had moved toward the staircase. The other three had not moved. She counted the distances. The door behind her, the staircase, the double doors to the main hall, which were almost certainly also locked. Her phone was in her left coat pocket. She did not reach for it. Damien's phone was ringing. She knew this. Whether he answered it in time, whether Marcus had already been rerouted, whether anyone was 30 seconds away or 30 minutes away, she did not know. What she knew was the room she was in, the four men in it, and the man on the stairs who was waiting for her to make a decision. "I'm not going to testify," she said. Solis absorbed this without visible reaction. "Then we're going to be here for a while," he said. "And your father is going to remain where he is." "My father made choices," she said. The words were harder to say than she expected, and she said them anyway, because they were true, and the truth was the only thing in this room she had full ownership of. He made choices for 20 years, and he's answerable for them. I can't fix that by burning someone else. Burning is a dramatic word for testimony that dismantles a man's life and hands his operation to the person who dismantled it, she said. Call it what it is. Solis came down the remaining steps. He was on the lobby floor now, 15 feet from her, and the four men above had all moved toward the staircase in the casual, synchronized way of people who have received a signal she hadn't seen him give. "Ms. Whitmore," he said. His voice had changed. Still professional, but the pleasantness had been set aside, the way you set aside a tool you've finished using. "I've been patient with this conversation because I respect intelligence, and you have an unusual amount of it, but I've also been doing this for a long time, and I know that patience has a practical limit." He stopped. "Tell me what I need to know about DeLuca's operation, and I'll have your father processed out by morning. Don't. And we'll have a longer and considerably less comfortable evening." She looked at him. She looked at the four men now arranged at the base of the staircase. She looked at the bag in her right hand. Then she threw it at the nearest work light. The bag hit the lamp housing, and the light swung violently on its cord, the beam sweeping across the lobby in a wild arc that strobed the room into lurching shadows and sudden dark patches. And in the half-second of visual chaos, she moved, not toward the locked door, not toward the staircase, toward the double doors to the main hall, because locked meant locked from the outside, and the main hall doors would be secured with interior hardware, and interior hardware meant she hit the doors at a run with her shoulder, and the left one gave, not fully, not cleanly. The latch cracked and the door swung inward with a sound like a gunshot, and she was through it and into the main hall before anyone on the mezzanine had completed a step. The main hall was vast and black. Her eyes found nothing for the first 2 seconds, just total dark and the smell of rot and old velvet and the specific cold of a space that has not known heat in years. She ran by memory and instinct, her hands out, her feet finding the floor in front of her by feel, and she ran toward where the stage had to be. Forward, downward slope of floor toward the front of the building, and that meant the stage was ahead, and the stage door was stage left, and stage doors opened outward, because fire codes had required outward opening stage doors for 100 years. She heard the double doors behind her bang open. Footsteps. More than one set. Moving fast and not cautious, which meant they had light sources, and she didn't. She ran harder. Her shin found the edge of the stage, a hard, specific pain, the kind that blanks thought for a full second. And she went up and over it by feel, scrambled onto the stage on one knee, came up running, turned left, hands out, found the wall, found the door frame, found the bar handle. She hit it with both palms. The door opened into cold air, and she was outside in the alley behind the theater, concrete and chain link, and the distant sound of the river, and the orange wash of a streetlight at the alley's end, and she ran. She ran toward the light. Behind her, the stage door banged against the wall, and someone came through it, and she could hear the footsteps gaining. Not all four of them, one, maybe two, the rest still navigating the dark inside. And she hit the end of the alley and turned right onto the street and ran directly into Marcus. He caught her by both arms. He was breathing hard. He had been running too, from the opposite direction, and behind him were 3 more of Damien's people and a car with its engine running and the doors open. "Building's compromised," she said, the words coming out in pieces between breaths. Solis knew. 4 men inside. "He's still—" "We know," Marcus said. "Get in the car." She got in. Marcus got in beside her. The car moved before the door was fully closed. "Damien?" she started. "Already inside," Marcus said. She turned to look at him. "What?" "He went in the front when you went in the back," Marcus said. His face was doing the careful neutral thing it did when the situation was bad enough that editorial comment was beside the point. "When we realized Solis had adjusted, Damien—" He stopped. He didn't wait. The car was moving fast now, turning back onto Callaway, and she could see through the windshield the front of the theater building. The lights in the lobby, visible through the gaps in the boarded facade, and then new lights, moving lights, the specific sweeping motion of gunfire. 3 shots, close together, muffled by the building's walls, and then a 4th shot separately. Then nothing. The car stopped. "Stay," Marcus said, and was out the door before the word finished. She stayed for approximately 4 seconds. Then she got out. The front door of the theater was standing open. She went through it. The lobby was different than she'd left it. One of the work lights had fallen and lay on its side, the beam cutting across the floor at ankle height and throwing everything above it into deep shadow. One of Solis's 4 men was on the floor against the far wall, conscious, his hands pressed to his left shoulder. Another was face down and not moving. The 3rd and 4th she didn't see. Solis was at the base of the staircase. Damien was standing in front of him. Marcus had the 2 missing men covered from the doorway. Damien had blood on his left hand. She saw it in the sideways light, dark and specific, a cut across the palm that had bled significantly. And he was standing with his weight forward, slightly uneven, and she understood that the left hand was not the only place he'd taken damage tonight. Solis was looking at Damien with an expression that had moved through all its previous configurations and landed somewhere she had not seen on his face before. "It's done," Damien said. His voice was rough at the edges. Exertion and something else. The specific roughness of a man who has been hit somewhere that affects the breath. "You're done." "You can't—" Solis started. "Your operation is already gone," Damien said. "While you were running this theater performance, my people spent the last 2 hours at every address you gave Rains access to over the last 8 months. Everything you built is gone. Every contact, every document, every safe house." He paused. He breathed. The breath was not entirely even. "And the federal agency contact you burned, his supervisor has been cooperating with a separate investigation into your organization for 6 months. You burned the informant and cleared the path for the case against yourself." Why? Solis said nothing. "You spent 2 years trying to take what I built," Damien said, "and you handed me what you built instead." In the sideways light from the fallen lamp, Adeline could see Solis's face complete its final recalculation. The intelligence was still there. It didn't go anywhere. It just became retrospective, turning back on the sequence of decisions that had produced this particular lobby at this particular hour, finding each point where a different choice might have produced a different outcome. He found them. She could see him finding them. They didn't help. "The girl's father," Solis said. He was looking at Adeline now, not Damien. "I can make that go away." "You can't make anything go away," she said. "You don't have anything left." He held her gaze. He looked, she thought, genuinely tired. Not defeated. Tired, which was a different and more honest thing. "You chose correctly," he said. It didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like a conclusion. "Most people don't." Marcus moved forward. It was over. The police arrived at 11:40. Not because anyone called them, because the federal investigation that had been running parallel to Solis's operation, the one Damien had mentioned at the base of the staircase, had been monitoring Solis's communications for 3 months. And when his phones went silent at a specific address at a specific hour, the agents monitoring those phones had made their own decision about timing. Adeline sat on the theater steps in the cold and watched the street fill with vehicles and lights, and the organized motion of institutions doing their work. She had a jacket around her shoulders that someone, she wasn't sure who, had put there at some point. Her shin was swelling where it had hit the stage. She was very cold and very tired in the specific total way of a body that has spent 18 hours operating at the outer edge of its capacity and has now received permission to stop. Damien sat down beside her. He had his left hand wrapped in something, white cloth, improvised, already showing through in one corner. He sat with his elbows on his knees and looked at the street and did not say anything for a while. "Your hand," she said. "I know. You need—" "I know," he said. He looked at it briefly, looked back at the street. "It's not the hand that's the problem." She looked at him. In the light from the street, she could see what she'd suspected in the theater. His breathing was still not entirely right, a slight guarded quality to the way he held his torso, the careful stillness of someone managing pain in a specific location. "What did he do?" "One of his people," Damien said. "Doorway. Before Marcus got inside." He paused. "I've had worse." That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be reassuring. He looked at her. In the cold light from the street, his face was very direct and very present, the night's events written in the tension around his eyes and the set of his jaw and the fact that he was sitting on a theater step at nearly midnight in December because he had run into a building after her. "Are you hurt?" "My shin," she said. "And the bruise." The bruise was already there. Yes. He looked at the left side of her face. He had looked at it many times over the last 18 hours. She had counted without meaning to count. And every time his gaze moved to it, something happened in the region behind his expression that he did not translate into words or action, but that was, she had become certain, a real and specific thing. "Your father," he said. They'll process him out," she said. "The fraud documentation. Solis was the one who filed the acceleration. Without him, without his cooperation, the case loses its shape. It doesn't disappear, but it loses enough structure that Richard's lawyer can work with it." She said this carefully, with the precision of someone who has thought it through completely and arrived at an answer they can live with, if not celebrate. "He'll face consequences, real ones, but he'll be out by morning. And then?" "And then he faces what he did," she said, "without me there to absorb the impact of it, without a household to manage or a dinner to cook or an appearance to maintain." She looked at the street. He has to stand in it alone. Damien was quiet. "I'm not angry," she said. "I thought I would be. I've been waiting to be angry for 6 years, and the anger never came out the way I expected it to. It just—" She paused. "It turned into information. Everything Vivian did, everything my father didn't do. It just became information about what those people were, rather than something I needed to feel a specific way about." "That's not nothing," he said. "No," she said, "it isn't." A federal agent crossed the street toward them, looked at them, apparently decided that whatever conversation was happening on the theater steps was not his immediate priority, and moved on. "What happens to Vivian?" Adeline said. "She cooperated," Damien said. "Fully, from the point she arrived at my house. What she did before that," he paused, "is something she'll need a lawyer for. But she's not Solis. She's not Rains. She's a woman who made a series of very bad decisions motivated by a very recognizable kind of fear." He said it without generosity and without harshness, just factually, the way he said most things. "I won't move on her. She'll see that as mercy." "It isn't," he said. "It's arithmetic. She gave us more than she cost us." Adeline nodded slowly. That was, she thought, a fair accounting of Vivian Ashcroft, a woman who had spent her life treating other people as arithmetic and had ended up, finally, being treated the same way by someone better at the calculation. She thought about Vivian at the kitchen table with her bourbon. She thought about Vivian on the phone, voice stripped bare, saying I was wrong without the usual cushioning. She thought about the fingers moving on the knee of the burgundy dress. She didn't know what to do with Vivian. She suspected she never entirely would. Some things don't resolve. They just become part of the permanent landscape, features you learn to navigate around rather than through. "The 90 days?" she said. Damien turned his head to look at her. "The agreement," she said. "Executive assistant. 90 days, the debt gets cleared." She met his eyes. "The debt is cleared." "Yes," he said. "So technically," she said, I could leave tomorrow. He held her gaze. His expression did not change, and she had learned enough of his face in 18 hours to know that not changing was itself a kind of change, that the stillness was doing something specific, holding something specific in place with the deliberate pressure of a man who has decided not to influence an outcome he wants to influence. You could, he said. The restaurant group still has a structural accounting problem that's going to take at least 6 weeks to fully document and remediate, she said. Yes. And the shell company Rains built has 3 layers that need to be legally unwound before the properties can be transferred cleanly back into your portfolio. Yes? That's probably another month of work. Probably, he said. She looked back at the street. A car she recognized, Carla's car. Improbably, Carla had driven herself here at midnight in December. Pulled up and Carla got out with a thermos and a first aid kit, and the expression of a woman who has been doing this for enough years that midnight emergencies have ceased to produce any particular emotional response. They simply produce the need for coffee and bandages. Adeline watched her come toward them. I'll stay through the accounting work, Adeline said. After that, she paused. After that, I'll decide. Damien said nothing. Carla reached them. She handed Adeline the thermos and looked at Damien's wrapped hand and said, Hospital, in the tone of a woman who is not interested in negotiation. After the federal agents finish, Damien said. Now, Carla said. He looked at her. He looked at Adeline. She wins every time, Adeline said. I know, he said. He stood. He stood carefully, with the controlled effort of a man working around a specific location of pain, and he was upright before she could offer anything because he was precisely the kind of person who stands up on his own regardless of what it costs. He looked down at her on the step. You did well tonight. She looked up at him. I ran into a stage in the dark and hit my shin. Before that, I walked into a building I knew was a trap. Because you had to, he said. Because there was no other way to give us the opening we needed. He held her gaze. That's not the same as making a mistake. She thought about this. She thought about the 2 years she'd spent before his house. 2 years after the audit firm, inside the Whitmore household, managing a performance she hadn't written and hadn't agreed to perform and hadn't known how to exit. She thought about how long it had been since someone had looked at a decision she'd made in a hard moment and called it something other than a problem. Go to the hospital, she said. He went. Richard Whitmore was released at 6:40 the following morning. Adeline was not there when he came out. She had considered going, had sat with the consideration for a long time in the cedar-smelling room, lying on the enormous bed watching the ceiling change color as the winter dawn came in through the window, and had decided against it. Not because she didn't want to see him, but because what she wanted to say to him was not something that should be said in a federal processing facility parking lot at 6:40 in the morning, with both of them exhausted and raw and operating on the ragged edges of a very long night. She would see him. She would say what needed to be said. But she would say it when she was ready, not when circumstances forced her hand because she was done making decisions under pressure applied by other people. She got the call from his lawyer at 7:15 confirming the release. She thanked the lawyer. She hung up. She lay still for another few minutes watching the ceiling. Then she got up and went downstairs and found Carla in the kitchen. Coffee? Carla said, without turning around. Please, Adeline said. She sat at the kitchen counter and drank the coffee and felt the warmth of it move through her and listened to the sounds of the house. The particular morning sounds, the settling of a building as its temperature rose, a door somewhere above, footsteps on the upper floor that she recognized as Marcus. Slower and with more weight than usual, the footsteps of a man who also had not slept. An hour later, Damien came downstairs. His left hand was properly bandaged now, white and clean, and he moved with the careful economy of someone who has been told to rest and has interpreted this instruction as loosely as possible. He looked at her on the stool at the counter. He looked at the coffee in her hands. He went around to the other side of the counter and poured his own. They sat on opposite sides of the kitchen counter in the winter morning light and drank coffee and did not speak for a while. And the silence was the kind of silence that has earned its own quality over time. Not empty, not uncomfortable, but inhabited, the way a room becomes inhabited when the right people are in it long enough. My father is out, she said. I know, he said. He had already gotten the same call. He's going to need legal support, she said. The fraud case doesn't go away. It just... I'll connect him with someone, Damien said. Someone good. She looked at him over her coffee cup. Why? He held her gaze. Because you stayed, he said simply. She looked down at the counter. The granite was cold under her fingertips, the same cold as the counter in the Whitmore kitchen where she had pressed her palms flat on Christmas Eve and steadied herself before carrying the serving dish into the dining room, before sitting at the far end of the table, 2 chairs removed from the nearest guest, before the evening came apart in all the ways it came apart. I found something in the restaurant accounts last night, she said, before everything happened, a discrepancy in the vendor payment processing that isn't connected to the Hartwell fraud. It's separate, smaller, but it's been running for 3 years and it's going to compound into something significant if it isn't addressed. She looked up. I want to fix it. Then fix it, he said. It's going to take time I didn't agree to in the original arrangement. I know, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, the winter morning was pale and clear, the snow in the side garden still undisturbed and flat and white, the bare trees casting their thin shadows across it with the unhurried precision of things that simply continue regardless of what people do in the buildings beside them. She thought about the oak tree in the front yard of the Whitmore house. She thought about sitting in it as a child and watching cars move through the street below and imagining a life that belonged to someone else entirely. She thought about the fact that she had stopped imagining other people's lives at some point in the last 31 years, had stopped because imagining requires hope, and hope requires a belief that the distance between where you are and where you want to be is crossable. And for a long time, she had not believed that. She believed it now. She didn't know exactly when it had happened. Somewhere between the Christmas dinner and the cedar room and the financial statements and the cold alley behind the theater and the theater steps at midnight with a thermos of Carla's coffee warm in her hands. Somewhere in there, the belief had returned without announcement, without ceremony, without asking permission. Okay, she said. Damien looked at her. I'll stay, she said. Not for the 90 days, not for the accounting work. She held his gaze steadily, with the particular directness of a woman who has recently learned the value of saying exactly what she means, without softening or qualifying or preemptively apologizing for taking up space. Because I want to. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. The word was simple, and it held everything it needed to hold, and he did not add to it, because he was, she had learned, a man who understood that some things are ruined by elaboration. Carla turned from the stove and set a plate between them on the counter and said, "Eat," with the same authority she applied to everything, and went back to what she was doing. Adeline looked at the plate. She looked at the man across the counter. She looked at the window and the pale, clear morning outside it and the undisturbed snow in the garden with its thin tree shadows crossing it, patient and precise. She picked up a fork. Outside, the city moved in its ordinary morning patterns. Traffic beginning, a dog somewhere barking twice and stopping, the distant compression sound of a garbage truck on a parallel street, a child's voice from somewhere in the next block, high and clear, and carrying through the cold air with the specific, uncomplicated energy of someone who has just woken up and has no memory of the night before. The Christmas dinner that had begun with a slap had ended with a city block of federal vehicles and a man with a bandaged hand sitting across a kitchen counter in the morning light. Nothing about it was clean. Nothing about it was simple. Her father would spend the next year navigating the consequences of a life built on borrowed appearances, and Vivian would spend hers accounting for decisions made from a fear that had never been fully examined, and Richard Whitmore would sit in rooms without his curated social image and learn, slowly and at considerable cost, what he actually was when the performance was no longer available to stand in front of him. And Adeline would do the work in front of her. The restaurant accounts, the shell company, the 3-year discrepancy she had found the night before. She would do the work, and she would do it well, and she would build, from the specific rubble of this particular Christmas, something that had her name on it in a way that nothing in the last 6 years had carried her name. Not because a man had saved her, because she had walked out of a locked room on her own, through a dark theater, by feel, toward a door she could not see but knew had to be there. That was the story, not the slap. Not the Mafia Boss in the doorway, not the Christmas dinner that became a battlefield. The story was a woman in a dark building running by feel toward a door she couldn't see and hitting the bar with both hands and the door opening outward into cold air. That was the whole of it. She ate her breakfast. The morning came in through the kitchen window, pale and without apology, the way winter mornings do. Not warm, not promising warmth, but present, undeniably and completely present, which is sometimes the only thing that matters and is, on the right kind of morning, entirely enough.